The Center for Innovative Technology and Mach 37, Virginia's Cyber Accelerator, present Uniting Women in Cyber: Leadership, Innovation, Inclusion.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gigi Shum, and I'm going to be the moderator of the panel today for Women in Leadership. And I have a great panel. I think I will just go ahead and let you ladies introduce yourselves. So, Alexa, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yep.
I think so. Great. My name is Alexa Rod. I'm the COO of Cybersecurity, which is based in California. I work from here. I've been in the DNS world, for you DNS gearheads, for almost 20 years, and the last 10 to 12 years in cybersecurity.
Great. Yolanda?
Hi, my name is Yolanda Skiles. I'm a lawyer at Capital One across the freeway. I manage the company's privacy and data security function, and I've also overseen our intellectual property litigation team. I'm excited and delighted to be here. I've devoted my career to technology issues beginning in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s, before it was a thing. So I'm excited to hear your feedback and thoughts and engage you in a good discussion, we hope.
Good afternoon. Tiffany Olson-Jones. I'm the CEO of Distill Networks, a leader in bot mitigation capability. Prior to that, I spent a number of years way back when as a Coast Guard officer, then at the White House in the first office of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection. Spent 10 years at Symantec Corporation in public policy, government affairs, and then moved over to the dark side of business development and sales. Was Chief Revenue Officer of iSight, a cyber threat intelligence startup, and then we were acquired by FireEye. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thanks. So I was handed this piece of paper. I understand that they had a meetup alley where they asked for feedback about what you would like to hear about women in leadership in cyber. And so here are some of the topics that were captured. Women in cybersecurity space, there are such few women. How do you get the respect you deserve in a room full of men? What techniques do you use? Mansplaining. That'll be a good one. Effective ways to deal with it, how to kill this culture. Everyone wants to be a leader, but a leader has to have followers. You're not going to vote unless there's diverse candidates, so you need diversity at the top in the boardroom. And it's hard to get to the top whether you're male or female. Women coming out of college and going into cyber is very low. I think you guys have been talking about that a bit already today. And men interrupt women, women need to interrupt back. So I think we'll hit a few of those topics in our panel. And I'm going to leave us time to open it up for some questions at the end. So I'm going to start with some statistics and a little bit of context. One of the things that I think we hear often is that the reason there are few women in leadership in cyber or in tech in general, it's a pipeline problem. And if you get to women early enough and get them interested in the field, get more STEM graduates, get more women entering technology companies, cyber companies, then eventually the problem will sort itself out, right? Have you guys heard that before? Yes? No? Well, every year McKinsey and Lean In Org do a study about women in the workplace. And in the 2017 study, one of the things that they showed was that that is a fallacy. It is not a pipeline problem. Women make up 57% of recent college grads, and so they're actually entering the workforce, and this is across all fields, by the way. They're actually entering the workforce in the same numbers as men. But right from the very first promotion, the very first leadership job, they are 18% less likely to get that first promotion. It's even worse for women of color. And it's even worse as you go from the first promotion to the second to the third. But the problem's starting right in the beginning. So if it's not a pipeline problem, Tiffany, I'll start with you. What is it and how do we fix it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, when you shared some of those stats beforehand, and after thinking about it a little bit, I said, you know what, that seems to make sense to me. There are a number of studies as well that talk about perception versus reality. And I have seen it, observed it, just from my experiences, you know, where you're in a meeting and you may have said exactly the same thing that a male peer of yours said in a previous meeting, but you are perceived to be a bitch, and the man was perceived to be extremely confident, right? And those are the, you know, perceptions versus reality conversations even that I've had with my exec coach, as I'm a first-time CEO, and where my board members and investors are much more supportive. And I think it's actually just something I've also seen, having been in military, government, large corporation, and startups, where in the tech startup world, I think there's a little bit more of an appetite and agility for women to be more authentic, perhaps, and stretch their muscles a little bit more, as well as to perhaps, you know, say, well, I know that's how I'm perceived, but I'm going to be true to myself and authentic with myself, and, you know, and I think there's just more support in general from what I've experienced.
Yolanda, how about you? Is it a pipeline problem? Is it a perception problem?
You know, I tend to think that the talent may be sitting right there, but it's not being elevated and promoted such that you can see sort of prominent people in those positions. I actually recall, as a young lawyer in Silicon Valley, I decided to stay in Silicon Valley. At that time, it was considered a backwater. So I went to Stanford, and all my law school classmates, they were either going to go to the East Coast and become like a titan of industry. They were going to do M&A and capital markets, or they were going to LA, which was entertainment. And they would say, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I think I might want to stay in the Valley and do this tech thing. And, you know, this is in 1995, 96, 97, and there was just not a lot of interest there. But what was interesting was when I went into my law firm, it was like, okay, you probably want to be an employment lawyer, or employment litigation, HR. And so sometimes women are sort of perceived as being more into sort of those softer fields. And I'm, you know, at that time, I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I don't like getting in people's business. Much love and respect to HR people, but I just can't. And I just thought, this is interesting. And I was like, no, actually, I want to do patent litigation and technology. I love the internet. And at that time, you know, I had CompuServe, and your email address was a bunch of numbers. And I wasn't an engineer, but I always had a fascination and interest with technology. So I think that sometimes there are multiple routes to get to the technology space. I mean, you do have some people like, you know, Zuckerberg, who are coders. But if you recall, Steve Jobs was not a technical guy, but he had this great, you know, innate artistic genius in which he could see simplicity in design. So I think sometimes you think, you know, to go into cyber or tech, you know, you must be a propeller head, you code, you're not good around people. But then if you look at sort of the leaders, I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, I don't know, like, you know, she has multiple talents and competencies that she brought to bear, and she was also in Washington, D.C. Before she went out to the Valley. So I would encourage everybody to look at sort of multiple facets of the people who need to make these technologies work, who they're designed to sort of address, who the demographic is, and so that we can see that we can contribute in multiple ways. I do think the pipeline problem is a perception problem. I think the talent is sitting right there, but we need to mine it and tap it and expand it and enhance it and you know, make the table setting broader and deeper.
Absolutely. Alexa, you are an engineer, and that's, Yolanda, that's a great point. We'll get back to that point, but what's your experience been?
I think the issue is not just a pipeline. I think it's also, we have to demand it ourselves. The fact is that a lot of, I think there was a question earlier on, you know, that people, the men, will apply for jobs even though they don't have all the qualifications. So we've got to help ourselves. So part of the problem is also in the recruitment. For all of you who are in the HR and the recruitment, what I've found is that they will look, particularly for women, they will look at the job titles you've had before, and only then they will want to give you and promote you for jobs that are still the same job title. Not so for men. So I encourage you guys to also look at skills, not titles. Pay disparity, we talk about it in Hollywood terms. Well, guess what? It's happening here. It's happening in every industry. And part of the problem, ladies, is that we don't ask for it. You know, you have to know your worth, and you have to ask for it. And you have to ask for those, better jobs. And the third thing is role models. Why is it that a lot of the female role models are in the entertainment industry? Not that there's anything wrong with it, but, look, Hidden Figures, I took my niece to see that twice. And the people who remember Hidden Figures remember the name of the actresses, not the three women. So we need to set up role models for our kids to say that you can be attractive and you can be a nerd. You can be smart and you can demand your worth, and not just in one particular industry, everywhere.
I was reading something recently that said, yes, women, you should ask for a raise, but the first thing you should do is prepare. Ask around what others are getting for either the role you have or the role that you're going for. Do some research. Secondly, don't just ask for a raise, ask for an amount. Right? I think that sometimes women go in and they say, I think I've been working really hard, and I think I've been delivering good results, and I think I'm making a real difference here, and I'm not sure that I'm getting paid what I'm worth, and I think I deserve more. And they almost choke back the words, right? Do you think that's how most guys go in and ask for raises?
It's a business case, guys. You've got to go in and you've got to say, here's what I have contributed to the company, bottom line. Here's the value that I bring. Have comparables. These are what this job or this kind of contribution in the industry is worth at this time. So it's got to be not a pity raise, not because, oh, they like you. It's got to be, man, they've really got to give it to you because there's competition for your talent, and you're just as good as the next guy. And if you don't have the confidence, try faking it.
Mm-hmm. You want them a little scared they're going to lose you.
Yeah.
Right. So, Yolanda, you brought up a good point, which is when we think about cyber and leadership, we think about STEM. But, we've got 4 of us here on the stage today, and Alexa, you came up as an engineer. Yolanda, you came up as a lawyer. Tiffany, you started doing policy work, and I came up through sales. So I just think that there are lots of different avenues. There's not one path to success and one path to leadership. Alexa, how did you get your first leadership role?
So just to correct you, so I started out in business. I started out in pre-med, then decided I couldn't stand the sight of blood. So didn't know what marketing was, but it sounded good. So I got that, and then I got an MBA, started out in working for telecom, realized that in talking to the engineers, the answer that I got depended on the question that I asked. And started to think, well, I really want a technical degree, so went back for my master's. So the way I got a leadership position was that I had a gut instinct. And I think one of the things you got to do is trust your gut. Back in the day when I was working for AT&T, and there was this thing called the internet. It was just starting to get started, and AT&T had this directory. And so I wrote this paper. It wasn't my job, but I wrote this paper and basically said, look, if they have this directory and these things called websites, it was going to eat into your revenue. It got up into headquarters, and they ended up offering me to become part of the leadership continuity program. And then I just got recruited from there. But my first CEO job was heading up .org, the .org registry. And I didn't know the job was available. Somebody told me that they're hiring, you should come and talk to the board. And I basically came in knowing that I didn't want the job, but told them all the things they were doing wrong. And that seemed to cement it.
It's funny that you say that. When I think about some of the women leaders, I often think that they get the jobs or take the jobs because nobody else wants them. You think about Ginny Rometty when she took over IBM, Mary Barra at GM, and and Tiffany Jones at Distill Network. So Tiff, tell your story.
So like I said, I was a chief revenue officer at iSight, went over to FireEye, was running strategic partnerships, alliances, OEM business for FireEye. When I started getting some calls and was interested, I was itching to get back to another startup environment. I was just really enjoyed that and wanted to get back to another startup. And so I was considering COO jobs, right? Thinking to myself, okay, I eventually want to get into a CEO role. What's the logical path, right? And the logical path for me, based on my skill sets and what I could contribute and provide value around, was a COO role. I ended up getting an offer from Distill Networks to be the COO for the company, and less than a week before I took the job, 3 days to be exact, I get a call to come in to meet with some of the leadership and some of the board members, and it was then that they offered me on the spot the CEO job, right? Without knowing that they were going to be asking me that question. And I gotta be honest with you, I was scared to death. Scared to death. Like, this is amazing, holy shit. I took the job, I took the leap. Glad I did. The best jobs I've ever had, by the way, have been the ones that have scared me the most. And so if there's one piece of advice I could offer, it is take the leap. You may not have done the job before. We all have a first time, right, in any job, man or woman. And it's really important that you find the mentors and people in your life that know you have the potential to succeed and be in the role, not just because you've been there and done it before.
I love that story. Yolanda, you took a scary leap. When you moved to the East Coast from Silicon Valley, you decided you were going to start your own firm.
Yes. So I relocated to the Valley. My husband is, from the Valley to the DC metro area. My husband's from DC. So it was in 2007, very opportune time, correct? And so I found myself in a town that, as I mentioned before, that either everyone works for the government or lives off the government. So I was like, okay. So what to do? So I actually just, got a few legal jobs, looking into FARs and DFARs and things, and regs were just not my thing. Defense contracting was not going to work. So what happened was that some of my clients and colleagues from the Valley, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, were calling me saying, hey, this matter's too small for my firm. I hear you're in DC, would you like to take it? Or I have some client in DC who needs help with their website. I had someone who called, it was like a gospel music website, and they needed to just get terms and conditions and security controls in place. And so I managed to just, have the work come to me and be able to create a space for myself where there wasn't, an immediate sort of niche for me, particularly during the recession. So I just learned that there are just multiple avenues and paths to success. So I am out here doing my thing. I eventually joined a bigger firm where I'm going to try to grow their legal department with them and bring my clients with me. And so I'm pitching this big bank called Capital One, and at this time I'm doing patent litigation. So the gentleman that I'm in touch with, I'm sort of, qualifying my leads, doing my BD, hitting the ground running like everyone else does. And so he was on my list, call him, hey, this seems like an interesting legal development. This could be of interest to you. I have box seats for this, and he was polite, sometimes yay, sometimes nay, mostly nay. Sometimes he would palm me off to other colleagues. And so, but I just continued to work my leads, and I had a number of connections, including Capital One. So when the phone rang in August 2014, and I saw it was his caller ID, I said, oh my goodness, finally Capital One is going to give me a case. So I answered the phone, and he actually said, well, actually, I'll do you one better. I'm thinking about sort of developing an intellectual property team and having you lead it. Would you like to consider working for us? And so that opportunity was like you keep all of these pots stirring, and you're not exactly sure which one is going to bubble up. And I didn't expect that because I was sort of in my own private practice, had left sort of corporate law departments, and so I found myself here. and then eventually leverage sort of that position to lead privacy and data security there. So it's sort of, you know, you can kind of go like up, across, down, and around. But one thing I can say is that I continue to push myself. So whether it was sort of opening my own firm, whether it was sort of moving from intellectual property litigation, patent, trade secret cases into privacy and cyber. So I think, you know, you can sort of have yourself be your motivating factor and understand that getting broad, deep experience in a number of areas just eventually begins to pay dividends.
That's great. The next topic I want to talk about is the perception topic, because I think it's one that all women in leadership roles have to deal with. And I'm going to quote a study that I read about in the Harvard Business Review this time last year. It was a study that the Harvard researchers did in conjunction with the government of Sweden. And in Sweden, as well as several other European countries, rather than a Silicon Valley where most of the money is private, a lot of the venture money comes from the government. And so this research project, they actually didn't interview, they listened to the tapes of over 100 different entrepreneurs who pitched to the Swedish government to try to get funding for their new idea. Now, an interesting statistic is that 1/3 of the businesses in Sweden are women-owned, but they actually get about 15% of the venture money, so a disproportionately small amount of the venture money. So this research project goes on. They listen to all the tapes of the government panel talking about the entrepreneurs that they've just seen pitch. And here are some of the comparisons. When about one young male entrepreneur, he's young and promising. A woman, she was young but inexperienced. A man was experienced and knowledgeable. The woman was experienced but worried. A guy was cautious, sensible, level-headed. A woman was too cautious. She doesn't dare. A man was arrogant but very impressive, competent. The woman lacked network contacts and was in need of help to develop her business idea. So, perception is reality, ladies. Alexa, have you run up against the perception issue, and how have you dealt with it in your career?
Yeah, I have. And just a recent story, about 2 years ago, I spent a year working as a consultant to private equity and VC companies doing due diligence on M&As. And prior to that, for 5 years, I started my own company, and I had actually come to CIT, had done presentations, sought VC backing. What was funny was that after I had, I was the most experienced I was ever going to be at that point. I'd gone, there's a saying, I think Churchill said, success is lurching from failure to failure. So I had had a number of failures that I thought, and some successes. And so what was funny was that I was good enough to do due diligence and tell them what companies they ought to buy, how much they ought to pay for it, whether the product was viable or not. But those very same questions that I would be asking the company on the other side, that when I was asked that, the response wasn't as positive. In other words, I was good enough to do the due diligence, and they would rely on me on where they were going to place the money, but not good enough for the CEO job. So I went back to one of these VCs that I developed a really good relationship with, and I said, why? And you know what his answer was? I didn't think of it. Never occurred to him. And so that encounter really stuck with me, because it just underlined for me that unless you are vocal, unless you actually don't sit there and wait until they come to you and say, well, how about you running this company? Unless you say, you know what, here's what I think you ought to do, and by the way, I can run it for you. They may not think about it.
Tiffany, you have any stories to share like that where perception kind of got in the way of reality?
Yeah, and I've got a little bit of a different perspective because, I think it's innate in just my personality. As you could tell, I'm a bit of a potty mouth, the sailor background maybe. But I grew up as a tomboy. I'd play Barbies down the street with the girls and then head back in the other direction and play G.I. Joe and Star Wars with the boys. And so I've always just had this ability to connect with both sexes pretty well. And while I'm authentic and true to myself, I know what it takes to engage and communicate with a man differently than a woman, or with someone who's more of a thinker than a feeler. That's just one of my strengths or skills. And so to that end, for those of you who may have other strengths or other skills, it's making sure you recognize where you lack, right? Where you have weaknesses. For example, I know as a CEO that I am really good in strategic and thinking about strategic development, strategy, go-to-market planning, sales, easy. Lack knowledge and wisdom on the finance side. So I hired the best damn CFO to teach me, right? And educate me and take me along for the ride. You know, so don't feel like you have to know everything. Know where your strengths are, leverage them to the best extent possible, and really know where your weaknesses are, right? And find ways to engage, get mentors, you know, learn. One of the things I did in cyberspace, like I started up through public policy, didn't have a technical background, so I worked my butt off, took initiative, went and got my CIPP for privacy professional, went and got my CISSP, not because the job asked for it, but to your point, like you took the initiative, right? You did things on your own to stretch in areas that you were uncomfortable around.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and so I want to, we could probably talk all day, but I want to open it up for questions from the audience. So first question right here in the second row.
How do you promote top-down behavior that benefits women below you? Like promoting, like you guys are all leaders in your companies and your industries. How do you promote behavior like payment parity and like leave policies that can benefit women in your industries?
I'll take a crack at that, and then I will open it up. So first of all, some of them are easy. Things, as a leader, right, if you see that you've got pay parity issues underneath you, fix them. Just fix them. And as a leader, you know, I mean, it depends, you know, I work for a small cyber startup now, and so it's very easy, but I've worked for very large corporations, and sometimes there's rules about how and when and how much. And, you know, you find ways to exert your influence to do the right thing. You will never be sorry at the end of the day for doing the right thing. The other thing is, as a leader, when I noticed that I didn't have enough diversity on my team, this was in a role where I had levels of leaders underneath me, I instituted something that I later learned was called the Rooney Rule. It actually comes out of the NFL. But I insisted, I said, the thing that we want to do is make sure that we hire the very best person for this job. But you may not bring a candidate to me for approval unless you can show me that you have at least interviewed in person a diverse candidate. Because it's just so easy, you know, we didn't really touch on the topic of unconscious bias, but I think that much of the bias that goes on in corporations is really unconscious. It's not that people are trying to be prejudiced or biased, it happens because people are attracted to people who look like them and sound like them and think like them. And so if you've got a lot of white males in the leadership ranks, the people who look and think and sound like them are going to be other white males, and that's going to be who they're comfortable. And so I just wanted them to look a little harder and to search a little bit more to find good, diverse candidates. And it made a tremendous difference when I instituted that.
I was just going to note, I mean, sometimes I've just sort of bloom where I'm planted. I remember that I managed a team, and there was one woman on my team, and her prior manager was like, you know, once she moved to my team, I talked to her prior manager, and he was like, okay, yeah, she's, you know, fair to middling average, you know, not all that awesome, but whatever. So I just remember just thinking, after she worked with me, I'm like, this woman is amazing. Like, what did he not see? Like, I'm giving her more work, I'm throwing stuff at her. She's continuing to come up with great ideas. Like, she's totally self-motivated. I mean, she delivers every single time and never misses. And so I'm just thinking, how did he overlook that talent? And so I just championed her. Like, you know, and frankly, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of a perception that, okay, if you're sort of there's sort of, you know, high potential talent and everybody else, like, you know, in terms of how executives tend to think about, you know, how they want to elevate people. And so I just managed to just give concrete examples of, like, this is what she's able to deliver, and have her turn that story around. So in that instance, like, I wasn't necessarily able to sort of like go up and you know, have us pull data on, you know, all the companies, and this happened to be a small company, how we were doing in terms of pay parity. But I knew in that exact example, and certainly I don't know what the impetus was behind that, was that this woman was not being evaluated objectively. And so, so that was just one opportunity that I had, like, under my direct supervision, where I know I made a difference. And there was no sort of committee that had to be assembled. There had to be no executive sign-off, no big D&I inclusion committee, like all those things that happen. And then we wait and nothing happens. So, so I just encourage other diverse, you know, leaders, women, people of color, to just manage to sort of look outside that lens. And if you see there's some performer out there who really should be getting more attention, just to shine the light there and do what you can. So that's my story to share.
I think we're probably out of time. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, great. One more question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I have not heard all day today, and I think it intersects with leadership and with perception, is issues of juggling a career and family.
Let me just say, as somebody who has 4 children, I could go on and on about that one. But I'll let somebody else. Any thoughts about leading while juggling a career and family? Tiff?
You know, it's such a personal thing for every individual, and so I would never want to prescribe anything for anyone, you know, lean in versus not. Like, it's such a personal choice. Just like my best friend was pregnant the same time I was. She was an attorney, could have gone back, been partner at a law firm. She chose to stay home. I chose to go back to work. There are days where I feel like a much better employee, like I'm killing it. That was a great day. And I am the crappiest mom, right? Like, and then there are days where I'm like, man, I was an awesome parent today. Like, this was great. And like, I feel like a crappy employee. Like, I don't think we're ever, at least for me, never gonna feel like I've got it all right all the time. And I've actually come to terms with that recently, which is a big thing for me. Like, you know what? I'm gonna do the best I can. And the other thing I would say is just, I put bigger boundaries in place now. I'm divorced. I have joint custody of 2 children. And so the weeks that I've got my kids, I put hard and fast rules down. Like, I will not travel during those weeks. I am home by a certain time. Do not contact me unless it's an emergency until after my kids go to bed, because those few hours that I'm with them every day in the evening are gold, right? So for me, it's just also putting in place some of those boundaries, right, to make sure that I try to balance things as best as I can.
All right, thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the panel.
Thank you.